Good morning. All right, I saw everyone looking up. I'm Blake Chisholm. I work for AWS Professional Services, and you are breaking down the economics and TCO of migrating to AWS. So how many of you are thinking about migrating? Okay. How many of you are in the middle of migrating? How many of you are done migrating? Nice. I see some hands out there. Great. I know you guys are. Yeah, so the session today is going to be fantastic. I mean, you have absolutely saved the best for last, not for anything that AWS has done, but for what this gentleman and his team has done. You're going to hear at the end of the session today about a company and a group of people who have completely migrated off of AWS. And I think the lessons learned and the best practices from that are going to be something that you can take back to your companies when you go back. So the first thing we're going to do today is talk about the migration bubble. That's a term that we're introducing that sort of addresses the process of migration and how to look at that. Next thing we're going to do is talk about the methodology. So obviously there's a lot of different levers that you can pull as you go through migrating your workloads. A lot of things that have to happen, so there's a methodology behind that. Next thing is the applications. There's so many different ways that you can migrate these apps, how that happens, what tooling you use, who does it, how long it takes, what the architecture is. So we're going to give you a framework for that you'll be able to use. Next is a level of effort. How long is it going to take? You know, is this something that takes an hour and you just fling it up into the cloud? Do you need Snowball? Do you need a big pipe and having it run all day, every day to get stuff up there? So the level of effort is important. And then finally, this is about cost, right? All of you are here because you saw cost somewhere in the title or in the abstract, and you decided that you need to find out about that. So we'll go through kind of a sample and give you an idea of how to calculate the migration bubble. So the bubble is a term that we came up with. It's not a fancy term. It's not a sexy term, but I think it fits what we're talking about here. The bubble is something that a lot of our customers don't take into account until they get there, and then they're surprised by it, and then the whole thing stalls. The whole process stops because they hit that wall. So what we want to do is kind of talk about how do you plan for the bubble in a way that makes sense financially. And when I talk about the bubble, I'm talking about the actual migration itself. So a lot of times when you do a cost analysis and you say, okay, here's what it costs us to run on premise. And you know what those costs are for the most part, right? Your hardware and your licensing and your data center and network and all of these things. And you can calculate what it costs to run on AWS, right? We've got the perfect calculator online. You can go on there, you can plug in exactly what you want and it spits it out. You know, are you going to do RIs, all of that? But in the middle, we don't have a calculator for how you're going to get there, right? What it's going to take to get you there. In terms of running duplicate environments, of having additional people and all that kind of stuff. So there's a couple of challenges with the migration itself that will extend the bubble or the migration process. Some of those you can see up here. Lack of information, not having an up-to-date CMDB, not having the tooling, inaccurate data center cost, et cetera. The bubble is really made up of 6 main components. You want to have the planning, right, and assessment. So it's really crucial to understand what your environment is, which applications are in scope that are going to be moved. Migration tools, you know, you can do clean builds for everything if you want to. That's probably not going to be the most effective way to migrate. So look at some of the migration tools that are out there. We've got some excellent partners that can help you with automating the process. So getting the tooling, consulting partners. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but your team has a day job, right? And that day job currently isn't migrating a bunch of workloads to the cloud. And so you can heap all of this stuff on them and kind of burn them out in the process, or you can bring in outside support when it makes sense to speed up that process and shorten the bubble. Internal training is crucial, right? Get the right training for your staff. And so that's kind of an additional cost that's included in that. Duplicate environments, you'll be running on premise. If you take 99% of all your workloads out of your on-premise data center, it's still got to run, right? You're still paying for it, even though it's housing 1%. Plus, you're paying for the other 99% on AWS. So those duplicate environments are something to think about. And then lease penalties, you're breaking contracts. You need to be thinking about that long term. If we get out of a colo facility, what's it going to cost us to do that? If we have a licensing agreement and maybe you're moving to some sort of open source, how do we get out of that? What is the cost associated with that? So all of these things together kind of put together this bubble that we're talking about. You can see that the cost moves along pretty steady. You know what your costs are. As you move into the bubble, the costs go up. Plan for that. Understand what these costs are going to be, because on the other end of it, when it goes down and you begin to optimize, then you say, okay, the actual cost of the bubble is X. What is it going to take us to pay that off with the reduced cost and the savings when they're optimized on the other end? So the idea is there will be a bubble. It will cost you more during the time that you're doing that, but can you justify it with the savings that you're projecting down the road, and what is the payback? If you have this type of information, your CFO is going to say, okay, this makes sense, right? If you don't have this and you don't predict the bubble and you head into it, things are going to stall out and fall apart. So the migration bubble is really an important piece of kind of what we're talking about today. I'm going to let Shabazz go through some of the next steps here, talking about how to calculate the cost, how to do the migration, and things like that.
Thanks, Rick. Hi, everyone. My name is Shabazz. I'm part of the professional services practice based in New York City. When we talk about on-premise costs, there's a number of different factors that you have to consider. So first of all, it's really important to understand exactly what your on-prem costs are, because how many of you have a CFO who you report to? What do the CFOs care about? Money and cost. So understand what it is today so you can show the benefit of what tomorrow will look like. So when we talk about on-prem costs, there's a number of things, including server costs, storage costs, networking costs, and labor. And as you're coming through all these costs, the one piece that you don't want to forget is all your overhead costs, including space, power, cooling, right? All the pieces that it takes to run your data center. So once you've defined your costs, then you have to think about how you're actually going to migrate. So we've developed the AWS migration methodology to be able to help customers walk through this. So it's not anything that's too cumbersome. Right? You got to plan, you got to migrate, and then you got to run. So standard SDLC process. So once you're going through and you've decided what your strategy is going to be, you've designed your architecture on AWS, now you're going to go over and migrate. And we're going to spend the rest of this session talking about the migration phase. Right? So if you look through all the bullet points of the migration part, you only see migrate as one bullet. And there's all these other factors that you have to start considering. Right? Think about what your infrastructure integration is going to look like. Think about how you're going to test this out. Think about what's going to happen once you cut over. And the most important part is decommissioning. Right? Cost savings don't occur until you actually turn something off. So how are you actually going to migrate? So the first part that we think about when we look at the various ways to migrate over is I need to first understand what I have today. Right? So I'm going to discover my environment. I'm going to design what it's going to look like. And then I have to determine the migration path. And there's several ways we can take this. Right? So first of all, there's going to be a handful of workloads that just can't move over or that you want to decommission. So those fall out of scope. Then there are some applications where you actually want to move them over to a SaaS solution. So bring them over your HR system, for example. You might want to move your CRM system over to a SaaS-based product. And that sort of filters out of scope as well. Now we're really left with two main paths. So the first one is you can actually move the application over. And when you're moving the application over, there's a handful of ways you can do this. You can either lift and shift it over, and then you can use third-party tools to try and help you with this. Or you can actually start refactoring it or replatforming it. So replatforming is the idea of, I have something else running on Unix today. I need to make it into an x86-based system, so now I'm going to convert it over to Linux. Right? And at the same point, as you refactor it over, you got to look at all different application components that exist on there, and from there, be able to architect it over into your AWS environment. Followed by that, you can also move the application infrastructure over. This means you're not just moving the application and the package over, you're also moving over the physical VM or the server that it sits on as well, and take the entire host over. And as you're moving the application over, there's a handful of ways you can do this as well. You can lift and shift, take it exactly how it is today and move it over. It'll sit exactly what it looks like. Or you can refactor a bit for AWS. So you can take some benefits of the cloud that we offer in terms of auto-scaling, some of the flexibility and agility that come with AWS. And as you determine the migration process, there's a handful of ways to do this as well. You can use third-party tools, you can use VM import that AWS offers, or you can manually move all the data over. And once you've decided how you're going to move all of this over, you're going to go ahead and sort of plan out, migrate it, do some UAT testing, do some unit testing, think about sort of organizational change management, and then finally sign off and cut over. Now, the important part here is, as you move from the top down, it gets much more difficult to actually determine what the costs are. When you're talking about completely re-architecting an application, there's a number of variables that come into play. And those variables are very hard to quantify. So for the rest of this session, we're going to focus on sort of the easy part, just makes it easier for us to explain it to you. Right? We're going to focus on the piece around determining the migration process. We're going to talk about lifting and shifting, either as the application or lifting and shifting the infrastructure itself. So when you're talking about lifting and shifting the infrastructure itself, there's a handful of ways that you can actually do this. The first one is called VM conversion. This is what takes a VMDK file and converts it over into an AWS recognizable format. And there's a number of tools that can help you with this process, such as the AWS VM import. Zerto is another tool. The second portion is called host cloning. This is where you actually take the entire host itself and push that over into AWS. So you're going to copy over the OS, you're going to copy over all the configurations that you've had. And we think this is really great for production workloads, but are non-critical, because you still have to take some downtime. Now, there's tools like Racimi, which are really apt at doing this and can help you. Next is what we call application containerization. Application containerization is really when you're taking the application and moving it over. So the idea is you take the application that exists today, you containerize it because you may not have the actual application package. You may have made some changes throughout the years on your application. How many of you have made these emergency changes and never actually coded it and saying, oh, here's all the change I made, put into the CMDB because it was just an emergency situation? Wow, all of you guys are really good at managing it. Oh, no, OK. At least one admits fault. So there's changes that you make to your application, and you may not know exactly what changes were made. And if you were to just move the original application package over, or the package that's sitting in your repo, it may not actually function the way you are. So app containerization tools like AppZero are really good about taking the application, being able to containerize it, move that container package over, and dissolving that container. Right? The other way you can do it is called live migration. So live migration, you're actually taking the source system which sits on-prem, connecting it to a system on AWS, an EC2 instance with an EBS volume, and then as changes are made onto your on-prem system, those get replicated over. So for workloads that are critical, that can take near zero downtime, live migration tools are great. Because any change that you've made up until the point that you're testing, that you're trying to make sure that this functions properly, you can make sure that it carries over and sustains. And then you can do the cutover, and then all your traffic will start flowing into AWS. Right? And the last piece to really think about is data. Data is king, right? Data gravity. Wherever the data is, that's where everything is going to be. So think about how you're going to move over your databases, your data warehousing solutions, and there's tools like Attunity. We also announced the AWS RDS migration tool as well earlier this week. These tools are great to be able to help you migrate over your data. So now that you've decided what data you want to move over, you've decided which path you want to take, you have to think about where it makes sense and how long it's going to take you. So throughout the hundreds of projects that we in AWS Professional Services have completed, we've come up with sort of 5 main buckets to be able to determine how long it may take to move over. Right? And these numbers are on a per server basis. They range from 2 to 4 hours on the low end to about 20 to 24 hours on the high end. Right? And these are mainly around moving the application or moving the infrastructure over as a lift and shift. So thinking through areas such as, is it a standalone server? Does it have a database? Are there multiple disks involved that you have to convert over? Do we have any dependencies? Can it sustain any downtime? And so throughout that period, you can sort of determine how long it might take to actually move these over. So the key part is that speed comes at a cost. So you have to think about which levers you're willing to pull and what you're willing to give up on to be able to meet your timeline. So determine what your timeline is, determine sort of what method you want to move over. Do you want to completely re-architect the application before you move it over to AWS? Or do you have a time crunch where you have to get out of your data center because your lease is up? And I want to move it as fast as I can to AWS, and then once I move it over, then I'm going to work to optimize it to allow it to take the benefits of auto-scaling and some of the other features that we offer. So when you're trying to consider your migration costs, really think through the holistic picture. So you have AWS costs, right? Compute, storage, networking. But then you also have third-party costs, right? Don't forget about your software licensing. Don't forget about your storage vendors. Don't forget about your migration tools, right? And then labor, right? Ken's really going to get into this, but remember, your employees have day jobs. Some of them have night jobs as well, so they work about 20-plus hours a week. There are other periods of time where you're going to need help. You're going to need external people to come in and help you, them being consultants, to help you either move things over, help you re-architect, help you decide how you're going to upgrade. And then also take into account the time it will take to refactor. Are you running on Windows 2003, which is end of life? Do you need to upgrade it before you move over? Are you running on an unsupported version of Linux? Think about what it's going to take to move your database over to Amazon. And finally, the hardest part, and the part that's most difficult to cost, is the change management. The change management portion is just as important, if not more important, than the technology itself. Right? Think about what your governance is going to be. Think about what your operating model will be. How are you going to ensure that once you get into AWS, there's no technology sprawl? How are you going to make sure you're going to put some guardrails in place so that once people get over into AWS, they're not spinning up instances left and right and then without any cost control? Right? Think about training. Think about processes and service management. So let's do a sample TCO exercise. Right? We're going to do a total cost of operation, total cost of migration exercise. So this is a real-life scenario where we had a customer who had 469 hosts. So what we first did was that we worked with them to understand and identify what these hosts were, what they were doing, and we classified the migration effort. So we came from very low all the way down to high. So as you can see, we went from about 88 or so on the low end, which were easy to move standalone servers, to we had about 12, which were live production workloads, which had databases and multiple disks attached to them. Right? So if you just meaned out the average, if you meaned out the migration effort, it'd be a little bit around 5 to 6 hours. But what does the cost actually look like? So we started off by understanding, what were the different tools that we needed to use. And on average, if you look at the different tools, it's not a zero-sum game. You can't just use one tool for all scenarios. It came out to about $200 per server. Now, this is an average cost. This may be higher or lower for you, depending on the deals you work out with these vendors, depending on how many workloads you're moving over. There are some economies of scale. And then we also thought about what it would cost for in-house labor per server. So that came out to be around $850 when you looked at all the people who needed to be involved, from the DBAs to the server admins to the app owners. And then we also went and determined what the migration planning would be. So if you looked at how many hours it would take to bring in an outside firm, whether it be professional services or one of our partners, what that would take, and then to do the actual migration itself, the total cost came out to be about $1,200 per server. So when you multiplied this across all the 469 hosts, it was a little bit over $550K. So let's break this down in terms of what this would look like. Their on-prem costs, as I said, it's very important to show what the on-prem costs are when you're comparing it to the AWS world. So on-prem, they were running at about 1.7 mil. Their storage was costing them a little bit under $1 million. And when you added on networking labor, that also equated to about $1 million. On AWS, the runtime cost was significantly less. It was $700K. And when you added on about $250K for storage, as well as the IT labor costs, really, the cost savings were about 1.7 mil. And that's great, but there's one piece that we didn't take into account. What about the migration cost? Over $500,000 in migration cost, but that still means your break-even point is less than a year. So make sure you get your teams and your CFOs, as well as other folks within your organization to understand, here's what my cost is, here's what my migration cost is, and here's what my operating cost is going to be. And that's how you would determine your break-even point. So let's talk through about what a real TCM actually looks like. So you have Ken Griffin here from Harvard Business Publishing.
Let's see. Morning, everybody. There's when I came to Vegas this week, I was excited, and that's a word that I hear in every session, excitement, and we're excited to announce this and that. But I was really excited I thought I was excited about completing it. Now, as I look around the room, some of you, I can tell were at a party last night. You're not that excited today. But that's okay. That's okay. I'm going to tell you a little bit of what happened to us, how we actually completed this task. But I'm not excited about completing it now. I'm more excited with what I saw this week about being ready to start. It's kind of a real eye-opener for us that we can now focus on do the things we want to do. So I'm going to tell you a few things that happened. There's about 6 or 7 things that were important, I think, in our journey, that if I had known prior to this, it would have reduced my time in the bubble, and maybe you can take that back and maybe you can use it. So first, a little bit about us. Harvard Business Publishing is a subsidiary of Harvard University. We're founded in 1994, and our mission is to improve the practice of management and its impact in a changing world. We have 3 business units. Corporate learning addresses the needs of corporations. Higher education addresses the academic needs. If you've taken an MBA, you've used some of our content most likely. And finally, then Harvard Business Review. So that's our publishing wing. That's our bread and butter. And our main flagship product is the magazine we handed out with you today. This special Magic magazine. It's easier just to show you than to actually tell you what we do, so I thought that might be nice. But that Magic magazine improves the practice of management and its impact in a changing world. And it could also, if you read through it, there's a lot of good content in there, and I recommend definitely subscribing, and let me know, and I might be able to get you guys a discount. So, first of all, why did we go to the cloud? That's the interesting thing, you know. I mean, nowadays, 3 years ago was a big question. Now it's kind of a no-brainer. You should be going there, there's no doubt about it. But we're in the business of improving the practice of management, and we promote reinventing yourself, reinventing your company, reinventing the way you do business. And that's just what we did back in 2012 with our print organization. We recognize that, of course, the print industry is in decline, the publishing industry is dying, but we're still doing quite well. And that's all because of good content, but the brand doesn't hurt. But we moved, we shifted, we reinvented ourselves, and we made a conscious decision to go from print to digital. And that involved a whole bunch of new technologies, and we thought it might actually save us some money. We said, okay. And clearly, it makes sense. The fulfillment costs of the print industry and all that stuff is expensive. But when you move to the digital world, you take hundreds of thousands of articles with heavy graphics, and you have to maintain and secure them and make them available on any device you want to use. So there was a lot of movement involved with that. We knew it was going to be a technology challenge. And we had timelines on when we refresh hardware. So we looked at the cloud and we said, should we go to the cloud? And we weren't ready for it. It wasn't mature enough, we thought, or maybe we weren't mature enough. So we made a decision there, let's not go now. Let's refresh one last time, and then we'll figure it out in transition. So we made a decision to refresh our hardware, and we started that project. Now, the transition, the move to digital, was good, very good for business. And it was interesting. So HBR, they moved first, and then their content became available to corporate learning. And when you come around to September of the busy season for higher ed, everything converged, and we literally nuked ourselves. But we had this hardware project in the back burner. We escalated that, and we were able to get away. So we ended up in a place here, it's a very good place, that you could call it a private cloud. If we hadn't had that hardware on premise, we wouldn't have been able to survive that transition. So here we were in this situation, and the big question is, this was an awesome time for us. Why fix something that's not broken? And we looked at it and we said, okay, we've made a decision to go to digital. Clearly, technology has a huge role in the future of our business. Where do we want to be? And what technology do we want to use? So we said, okay, if technology is where we're going, we do want to go to the best and latest, greatest tools available to us. 3 years ago, you don't know what that was. We know what it is now. So what choices do we need to make? So we said, okay, it's important. We need to go to the cloud. It's technology-based. So let's think, what would make our company a great place to work for engineers? What do engineers want to do? They want hard problems to solve and the cool tools to be able to do that. So we said, okay, we're going to the cloud. And that was it. Now, cost is very important. This is what it's all about, the cost of migration. We didn't consider cost. Just like in the shift from print to digital to the magazine, we didn't do that to save money. We thought it might, but it wasn't the driver. In our case, moving to the cloud was also not the driver. We said, okay, we are going to change. We're going to reinvent how we deliver technology services to the business. We're going to reinvent our IT organization. And not being the primary driver, we're not really worried about cost at the time. Now, what we're finding, though, is during this transition and after the transition, we're finding cost savings that we weren't thinking about. Bonuses, as you were. Now, it's absolutely true that we're going to save money with AWS. And we were hoping that to be the case, but it wasn't the driver. Now, a few things had to happen for that to be true, and this is the big one. We had to be all in. We made the decision, we decided to go to the cloud, and we were just after doing a hardware refresh, and our CIO, Jason McNamara, went upstairs to the CEO and said, I'm never going to ask you for money for hardware again. So it was an interesting approach. He said, so before we have to refresh our hardware in 3 years' time, we'll have moved all our applications to the cloud, and we won't need to do that thing. Because we had just done it, we knew how hard it was, we were excited about it, and we moved on. But the key there, though, is at the time, it was just natural, but all through the migration, that was a very important part of this transition. Because if you go back to that bubble that the professional service guys were talking about, the cost here, you don't know how high your cost is going to be at a point in time, and you can't control that, but you can control the width of the bubble. What we were able to do is saying, in 3 years' time, we'll be done. So we could draw this line. So we said, this is the way it is. So it gave us a point in time. It gave us a semi-budget because we knew what we spent in the hardware refresh, and it gave us executive alignment. So it was really important. It happened for us, and I recommend, a lot of times people ask me, how much does it cost and how long will it take? And I say, well, I don't know. But if you did this, decide when you need to make a big hardware investment. If it's close, make it and say you're never doing it again. If it's far away, say, okay, we know when we would have to do that, and put that in as your stake in the ground. The one thing about understanding the costs in that bubble is you don't really know what the technology costs are going to be. I mean, how many instances are you going to need? This is where the professional service guys come in really handy for us. They did an analysis, an inventory. We were able to make some sort of outlook for that. But you really don't know. What we found is humans were the big cost. There's a lot of, laser pointer. Humans were the big cost because as you go into it, depending on what stage you are in your migration, you don't know what you don't know yet. Your people need training. Your people need plans. You need time. You need help. So the long and the short of what we found is the biggest cost for us was the people. The rest of it, it fit nicely into the budget with what we would have spent with the hardware. We used a lot of third parties. And when we were like, everything can be moved to the cloud. I mean, we moved Oracle's EBS. That was one of our biggest, scariest projects. It was literally very easy to do. We used Apps Associates for that. They had done it before. They had a blueprint for it. And we were still kind of, once we moved over to prod, we're saying, is this going to work? And still today, we're wondering, like, this is awesome. Still works. We haven't had a problem since. The one lesson we learned, though, is to reduce this time in the bubble, it's important to have a clear categorization of what you're moving and the timeline. And keep it simple was the key, So we moved about 100 workloads. we're custodians of these applications, but we don't own them. We have to go back to the stakeholders and say, here's what we're planning to do with your app. And we could dictate what we want to do, but it's better to have a partnership. So we try to get alignment. And if you think 100 workloads isn't a lot, we're a small company, but it's at least 100 meetings, and most likely a lot more than that. We have to go over and back and what's happening. And what do you decide on? When you move it, which moves first? Are you going to do lift and shift? Are you going to re-engineer it? Is it going to move at all? And all those conversations took a long time. So we devised a very quick way to help us to get those conversations down and to have a plan with what we're going to do. We literally said, a 4x4 matrix, is it easy to move or hard to move? And we decided that in IT. Is it critical or strategic, or is it not? And if you ask any of your business owners, is it critical or strategic, the answer is yes. Of course it's yes, the most important thing in the world. So we looked at a way to manage that, and we said, okay, where is it in the disaster recovery plan? Is it less than a week? Is it longer than a week? If it's longer than a week, then it's not critical and it's not strategic. And that's what we said. We said, okay, so we went to them and said, you have a not critical or not strategic app. So it is technical debt. It's a legacy app. It's not moving to the cloud. We can help you either replace the service with something else or decommission that. When we had an easy-to-move application, we just moved it. Even if it was not critical, it was easier to move it, if it's easy, than it was to actually have the conversation with somebody about decommissioning it. And as Shabazz mentioned, with all the SaaS applications, we moved whatever we could to buy the services we did. We moved our email, our CRM, our end-user storage, and whatever else we can get out there, we did very quickly. So we took two focuses. We vacated this quadrant here with the just do it, and then we moved our SaaS applications, and then this is the one important thing we do. Like, this is a marathon you're going to be in. This bubble is a marathon. And your legacy applications are like a stone in your shoe. The question is, you have to take it out. That's for sure. When do you take it out? Is it at the start of the race or at the end? And the race is a long, long way. So we made a conscious decision to say, we are going to remove our technical debt first. It's hard to do, but it makes sense. It makes sense. So we did that. We did 2 parallel tracks, SaaS and kill your legacy apps, and then we moved on to the main applications. The real thing about the humans, the second lesson we learned, really, it's different in the cloud. When you move to AWS, it's similar, but it's different. Our operations guys became software engineers. The development guys had more of an understanding about operations. And because of this difference, this change, it makes things hard on the people that are in there. So you're going to ask your people, and you're going to be one of these people who are going to be asked to maintain your day job, what you were hired to do. Learn new skills. And they're similar, but they really are new. And build out a new infrastructure, migrate your applications, decommission the old environment, literally reinvent yourself, and do it all on the same salary. But especially be excited about it. We want you all to be happy about all the work you're going to do. It's going to last a long time. The key about that is, how do you kind of take some of that pressure off? An obvious one is to get help. But like when you're in trouble, you say, don't worry, keep working. Because you'll be done at X. You have to be able to say when you're going to be finished. When is the cavalry coming? When can you relax? And the other thing was really important for us is we had no real way to measure what was going on. Everyone's working really hard. Some stuff is in analysis, some stuff is moving. And it was kind of interesting in the second year to say, how are we doing with the cloud? It feels really good. We're spending a lot of money. We're in the bubble. We didn't know the bubble existed. But we're in the bubble. We're spending money, but I have no idea really where we are with it. And marathons make you tired, and everybody's running this. Finance, executive management. Do we make the right decision going to the cloud? Where is our return on investment? When are we going to see it? So we work with professional services to devise a way to measure where we are. And this is an interesting thing, because if I had this at the start, my path would have been a lot smoother. And as one of the things we kept going through this migration is squeezing in little bonuses to keep the momentum going, adding help, moving a service, measuring what's happening. And I want to talk a little bit about this measurement here, because this is interesting. We also introduced the Agile methodology into the way we worked at the same time. And in Agile, they have a way of sizing the jobs. So we looked at what we had to do. You had dev, QA, and prod. Not that foreign to you guys. But dev was really hard because it changed people and technology. And QA was also really hard because, the people were already on board, but it changed the environment, changed technology, because QA is a replica of prod. It has the extra monitoring, logging, all that stuff. It was a real application standing on its own. And then production, relative to QA, was very easy. The only thing we had to do was cut over and manage the communication and the stakeholders. Still hard, but technology-wise, that was the easiest part of it. So we didn't know how to do that, so we said what we would do is prod being 1, QA being a 1 Fibonacci sequence higher than prod, and then dev higher again. So in the Fibonacci sequence, it's the number. This number is the sum of the two numbers previous to it. So you have 813, the next one's 21, then 34. And to measure it, we took what professional services has done with the inventory of all our applications and 3 columns, and we said, okay, find one that's easy. It's one that we can have as context, as a seed. This is number 1. This is a size 1. And what is everything relative to that then? And then in prod, we had the 1. In QA, we had the next number. And then in dev, we had the next number. We added up all 3 of those, and we get that. It's our 100%. That was our 100%. So in April of this year, Jason came and said, where are we? And I looked at it, we did the numbers, and it was kind of interesting. I said, we're at 47%. 6 months to go, 47%. And it was kind of like sticker shock. You're like, that's like not good. But it was better than not saying, I have no idea. But also when I explained it and I said, look at the timeline, it looks like we're going to be able to do it. And he brought that and explained that then to upper management. And then every day at the stand-up, we have a stand-up once a week, 10:30 on a Thursday. We sit around, we look at how these numbers work. And what it did for the engineers is it generated a little bit of friendly competition. They were looking at moving their stuff. It was being left behind. It started to have them talk to each other and generated a lot more momentum. So it did a lot of things for us. It also generated momentum outside of the IT organization. People understand what a thermometer is. They look at it and they can see. And then they ask questions and they think it's interesting. So it really helped also with the stakeholders. And they got involved and said, where is my app on your list? I was like, okay, this is good. So this thing was kind of cool. If I had it at the start, I think it would be easier, and I think we would have reduced our time in the bubble. The next thing is architecture. Clearly, architecture is key. But the important thing about architecture is if you don't do it well, you could extend your time in the bubble. We got some help. We made some mistakes. One of the things we tried to do was we're going to do a lift and shift and everything. We're going to pay a silly tax because our goal is to be in the cloud as fast as possible. And then we're going to come back on phase 2, and we're going to clear it up, and then we're going to save some costs and all that stuff. So we tried really hard. HPR was one of the first applications we moved. We tried really hard to do a lift and shift there. But it was hard. We had a fleet of web servers. We had an app tier, a database tier. When you include S3, it didn't work really well the way our application was built. We had to make changes anyway. And when we got some help from professional services, it made absolute sense to use CloudFront to remove our web servers and just, even though there were still changes to be made on the app, they were not as difficult as the other ones to make the square peg fit in the round hole. And the point I'm saying here is don't be afraid to take the easy wins on some of the stuff. Lifting and shift works sometimes, but in only really simple apps. Use the tools, get some help with the architecture. If we had a clear architectural plan beforehand, we did a lot of analysis like, do we try it this way or try it that way? Looking back, I would have said, okay, let's draw it out and attack that vector. The other thing is, it's interesting with the security side of things. AWS is FedRAMP certified in 3 zones, US East, West, and Gov Cloud. We, from Boston, set up in US East. If we hadn't, if we had been from somewhere else, perhaps we would have set up somewhere else. And then we would have had to move our applications to be FedRAMP certified. We just started selling into government agencies. They're requiring this. So now we're in a position to be able to get this certification. But without thinking ahead, we were just lucky in that case. With regard to the European privacy stuff, we know what we're going to put in Europe when we're going to put it, and that helps us paint that story. It's still a challenge, but at least if you think it through, it makes a lot of sense. In the same way with PCI and scoping and architecture. It'll save you a lot of time at the end of the day. So, one of the things then we really have to talk about, though, is that help is available. How do you reduce that time in the bubble? You all know a lot about the documentation, a lot about the solution architects, but let me talk a little bit about that. When we started off first, we were on our own, we were testing, we came to reInvent, we got really excited, we came back, and we called AWS and said, look, we're trying to do this. And they sent us people, say, you know what, if you're going to do this, let me help you. Let me lay out the highway for you to work with. And it was very low cost and very effective for us. When you get into it, further into it then, you into professional services. This is almost like as you walk through the bubble, these are the things you're going to have to do. The professional services, I have to mention, were absolutely top-notch. They challenged our best engineers, and it was actually as part of a momentum type shift. We have, like all you guys know that you're the most smartest people in the world, right? Our engineers are the same way, but when they went head-to-head with the professional services that came from AWS, they were also challenged, and it was good. They realized that, you know, this is real help, and they were able to drill down and to do some interesting stuff. That was a key thing. We've always had good people from AWS. They're hard to find, but at that time, they were absolutely valuable for us. One thing about it is also, though, they will not code anything for you. They're not allowed to touch the keyboard. You can trick them into it. But in theory, their job was to teach a man to fish, and or a woman. There's a lot of women fishermen. But they can't touch the keyboard. And that was frustrating for us for a while. We were saying, just do it, you know. And over time, it actually worked out really well for us. So the last thing then on this slide is the technical account managers. We're fortunate to be part of a larger organization. And because of our global spend, we automatically get technical account managers. I think it's 15 grand or 10% of your bill or whatever else it is. We don't have that high a spend personally in Harvard Business Publishing, but the TAMs used to show up on site for our stand-up on a Thursday at 10:30. They would come in, they'd attend the stand-up, and then they'd stay through to noon if there was any questions. And I used them as staff augmentation. And people used to go to them and ask interesting questions about whatever was coming, and that really helped us. They're really technical. When you make a call to support, it's normally 60 minutes return time. If you have a TAM, it's 15 minutes, and all three of our TAMs get paged as soon as a call goes in. So we really have, fast return times on support. So, parting advice. I'm ahead of schedule, so we're going to take some questions. One of the things we want to do is you need to go all in, really all in, not mostly all in, really all in, because it didn't make sense for us to not do that. If we have data centers left over, you're still spending all that money on that. Going all in is very important. Going all in helps your people, helps your momentum. Getting help early. You know, why would you wait? Like the stone in your shoe in a marathon, why wait? Include the security compliance requirements. That's very, very clear. This is an important one on automate everything. We thought CloudFormation would be a phase 2. We're going to spin up applications, we're going to do things very manually, and then we're going to include CloudFormation as a number 2. As it turns out, CloudFormation is absolutely necessary for the way we do it, and it's necessary to scale. We should have done that earlier. It would have reduced our time in the bubble. And now we have our ops embedded with our engineers. They write their CloudFormation, it's reviewed by somebody else, then it's deployed, it's maintained in Git, just like software, it's code-based infrastructure. But had we started that earlier, we would have saved some time. And if we had trained our people on that earlier, we'd have saved some time. We learned on the job, we learned a lot on the job. And they're fast learners. But looking back, I wish I put a training program in, required people to go. For example, the certifications I think would be awesome. You know, a lot of our guys are siloed in some of the tools that are available on AWS, but taking the certifications exposes you to those. It's kind of very important because you might find something, well, I could use that. And that would get people engaged and generate internal competition with those guys. Another thing here is a performance baseline. When you move the application, I'm talking a lot about momentum. When you're in this bubble, it's hard going. And you need to be able to generate new momentum all the time. And when you move an application, you need the PR. You need to be able to say, we moved application X, and it's faster. And I can prove it, I can show it to you, and everyone realizes it. If I told you it was faster enough, you'd probably believe it anyway. But the thing about it is, if you have the tools to measure that, it really helps with the PR. And there are some times when you need it on the other side. Someone says, hey, my application feels a little slower in the cloud now. You say, no, it doesn't. I can show you this. So we use Splunk, we use New Relic, tools like that to help us do a baseline before and afters. And the costs, this is all about costs and optimizing your costs. But I want to mention the reserved instances. We did it twice. And after, it's an expensive investment one time, but the second month, each time, it dropped our costs almost by half. So it really made a huge difference for us. And we're starting to investigate more now with spot instances and everything else. We're going to be moving on to phase 2 pretty quick. In actual fact, we're probably just going to go all in with all of the new tools that were exposed here today. And lastly, what I have here is it's all about the people. All about the people and all about maintaining their momentum and maintaining them. In my opinion, you, the engineers, your stock has increased like exponentially in the last 3 years. The most important thing for us, if you look at our risk now in the company, 3 years ago we had lots of different risks. It's very different. Right now, engineering talent is high on risk for the company risk. So it's very important for us to retain and maintain our engineers and to continuously look for new talent, continuously be out and about looking for new talent. Now, if you want to work in a company who has divested themselves of all the technical debt and traditional data centers and hit the ground running with all the cool tools we started today, you could come and join us. So if you're thinking about that, send me an email and we'll talk. So I think I'll hand it over and we'll have some time for questions.
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
So
thank you very much.
So I've got a couple of things, Ken, that I want to talk through. Just a few issues that I think you and I talked about that will be beneficial. I heard a customer the other day say, you know, the most important thing that ever happened to us was that our budget got slashed and we were forced to be innovative and we were forced to do things. Can you tell us a little bit about what the forcing function was that sort of accelerated your move? And why you had to get out of your data centers?
Yes, there was 2 times that, there was a lot of times, but 2 big ones. One of them was actually the second phase of the HBR print to digital. They decided what they were going to do is treat everything as an article, a comment in a blog, anything, and follow a lot more traffic inside in the website. So what they had to do was pull their third-party blogs into the data center, which would require us to have more bandwidth. And also then there was a shift they needed to change to a NoSQL database. Because of those big changes, we would have had to make changes into the data center. And we said, well, if we're doing that, couldn't we just quickly move your application? That's why HBR was the first one for us. Let's test it in AWS to see if it works. So that forced us. So what we did was we did an experiment. We took our best ops guy and put it with their best engineer and said, in 3 months' time, see if you can do it. It took longer than that, but it was an interesting thing. Once they started down that path, and even when we did the testing, we were able to talk back through the public internet to databases on-premise. So that forced our hand because we were asked to make changes to the data center. That was the first one. The second one was the
building.
The building move. So the burning of the ships was awesome because once we said we had 3 years, the thing about the deadlines, they're self-imposed, you can move them. So we were right at a point where 6 months ago he said, well, are you going to make it? I said, well, I think so, but if we don't, what's the big deal? It'll cost us some extra money. But we sold our building just before that, so we were physically moving from A to B. So our backup data center was on-premise. Had we extended our time in the data center, it would have impacted that move. And it was then people started to say, well, this is not moving. This is serious. The timeline looked like it could happen, but it was for real. We sent an email off. We canceled the contract on the data center. And I displayed that as another motivation tool. And I said, here it is. It's done, folks. You can leave your app there, but it's not going to work after September 30th. And we said September 30th to them, but it's actually November 30th. But they were all out by September. So that's why before here, just the week we came here, I was excited about it, you know. So
you're telling everyone they need to go burn down their data centers to accelerate the move?
To tell you the truth, I feel if we had that safety net, we would have used it.
Yep,
you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, and we see that all the time, that, you know, if there's not forcing function or a compelling reason to do that, then people are more content to just sort of drag it out as long as possible. It's not a comfortable thing. We talked about people, and I think specifically we talked about the technical people involved. I know that there were a lot of discussions about how to bring the AWS message and the cloud message to the entire organization. Some of them, it was just watching a video. You had some town hall meetings. Can you tell us how you sort of determine what level of AWS evangelism to provide to the organization?
Well, we were lucky because it started at executive management. In a way, we were excited at the fact that, okay, this was a hard project we did with the hardware. We're not doing that again. And executive had a good knowledge of cloud before. And we're a very small company. There's 350 full-time employees and about 300 contractors, So had it been 350,000, it might be different. So the executive management knew about this, wasn't really sure about it, but the town hall meetings for us were very effective. They were excited about it. They liked to know what was going on. And what was really nice was the actual stand-ups and the publicizing that the thermometer and the status.
Yeah.
And every time something went out, there was emails, clearly the users had to know about a change of an application rolling out. So there was a lot of promotions through email throughout the company. So everyone was connected quite a bit all the time.
Okay. What about the integration with the outside consultants with your internal staff? How did that work out?
Yeah. One of the challenges we had was you could come on board for us, but it takes you a while to figure out how we do things. The onboarding of that was surprising to me, where it took a long time. And we had split up into agile teams. Each application or each business unit had their own core teams, and even applications had smaller teams as well. So what we did, though, is we learned throughout the process that you can't staff all the teams all the time. And we don't want to do one thing at a time. So we set up an AWS SWAT team, and we took Matthew over there and put him in charge of it. So Matthew's the manager of our IT operations. So he took 3 or 4 consultants from Info Alliance and AWS, and they became the SWAT team. They came on site to understand how the different groups worked. So they had a stand-up with their groups every day. And then they kind of moved and shifted focus, which was most prioritized. Now, we use another tool called Fred. I was at reInvent last year, and there was this Cloud Ninja. I don't know what the company is. Is it Cloud Ninja?
Could be.
Anyway, it was Magical Fred, and we called him Fred. And whoever had Fred could control and get all of the help he needed at the time. But it was kind of a gimmick at the start, but what it showed us was what was on our critical path, because everything's on the critical path. But whoever has Fred really is critical. And it was able, organically at the stand-up, you had 20 people standing up quickly. They said, who needs Fred? And everyone agreed. So when it happened, when you needed help from me, if you had Fred, fair enough, but you would also have been involved and aligned with who needs Fred for the next week. So we had, until we had people saying, I need help, but Fred was the man. And the SWAT team was absolutely, vital to the success of this year.
Kind of a cloud center of excellence type of
Yes,
theory.
yes.
Great.